On my 74th birthday, my daughter handed me a brochure for a retirement home. Right after we finished cutting the cake I baked myself. "It's time, Mom," she said softly, as if she were offering me a kindness. "You'll be happier around people your age." The living room was still warm from the scent of candles and cinnamon. My grandchildren had just run off to play, their laughter echoing faintly down the hall. I stood there holding the brochure, staring at the smiling seniors on the cover like they were ghosts already picked out for me to join. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum wrapped in pastel colors and polite phrasing. I looked at her, my only child, the one I raised alone after her father died, the one I once worked 3 jobs for, packed lunches for, taught to braid her own hair because she hated when anyone else touched it. Now, here she was, scheduling my slow erasure from the home I built with my own 2 hands. I asked her gently, "Where would I go?" She smiled, rehearsed. "Dan and I talked it through. We'll sell the house and you'll use that money to cover the new place. You'll still have your own little kitchenette and patio. It's cozy." Sell the house. My house. The one where I planted tulips after every miscarriage, where I laid my husband's ashes beneath the oak tree, where I tucked her into bed every night of her childhood. "Cozy," she said, as if this life I lived was now just clutter she needed to clear out. How could my own daughter do this to me? I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded, pretended to consider it, because I knew something she didn't. You see, 6 months earlier, after a minor fall on the back steps, I'd quietly consulted with a lawyer, updated the deed, moved everything into a trust. She thinks this house is hers to sell, but she's about to learn otherwise, because I may be old, I may even be tired, but I am not done. And if she wants a fight for my legacy, she's about to get one. But to understand how it all happened, I have to go back to the beginning. I met Thomas when I was 22, waiting tables in a diner outside Austin. He was a lineman with hands like split oak and a voice that could settle a skittish horse. He left me a tip so generous I chased him into the parking lot to give it back. He smiled at me under the summer sun and said, "Keep it. Buy yourself an hour to sit with me next time." We married a year later and bought this house the following spring. It sagged at the edges like a tired mare, shingles missing, porch eaten by termites. We patched it together on weekends, roofing in August heat, sanding floors at midnight with fans roaring, laughing as sawdust stuck to our sweaty arms. I made curtains out of clearance sheets. He planted an oak in the backyard and pressed my palm to its slender trunk like he was introducing me to a child. Elise came late and hard won. After 3 miscarriages, I painted her nursery lavender with stenciled daisies whose petals were never perfectly spaced. Thomas cried when he held her. We both did. He died when she was 16. It was a Tuesday. He kissed my cheek, said he'd be back before supper, and he never was. The doctor's words slid off me like rain off a tin roof. I heard none of it. I just felt the absence of his hand on the small of my back, that quiet claim he made in crowded rooms that told me I was never alone. After the funeral, the world kept going, which felt obscene. I took a job at the library. I learned how to caulk windows, snake a drain, shovel snow without wrenching my shoulder. I learned the silence of a house when the person you love doesn't come back. Elise graduated, then left for college on scholarships and student loans, and the understanding that she would not sink. "You're strong," people told me at the funeral. Strength isn't a medal. It's a choice you make because the other option is to let the rot in. When Elise met Dan, I tried to like him. He had a salesman's shine and a handshake that lingered. He always looked around my kitchen with the faintest wrinkle to his nose. Like clean old things offended him. He brought wine with labels that looked like signatures and corrected my pronunciation of the vineyard as if that mattered more than the meal I'd made. They married quickly. Their house was new and echoing, with marble that showed every footprint. He liked it that way. Their children, Lily and Max, were bright and tender. The kind of kids who handed me drawings with both hands and looked up at my face to see if it pleased me. It always did. The fall on the back steps wasn't dramatic. My foot slid on wet leaves. I sat down hard. The bruise bloomed like an eggplant and faded to yellow, but Elise was spooked. "You scared me," she said, showing up with a casserole and a checklist. "We can't do this again." I let her fuss. I iced my hip. I pretended not to notice when she opened cabinets she had no reason to open, when she asked where I kept my will, when she photographed the pill bottles lined in a neat row by the sink. That week, I visited Mr. Brooks, a lawyer recommended by a woman from church whose son had tried to help her sell the family farm. He had kind eyes behind thick glasses and a desk that smelled faintly of cinnamon gum. We moved the house into the Whitman Family Trust, which sounds fancy but is really just a box I hold the key to. We wrote a letter from me to Elise and another from Thomas to me, composed from the notes he kept in a cigar tin. "If anything ever happens to me, don't sign anything until someone kind explains it twice." We also arranged something called a springing power of attorney. It lives in a sealed envelope and only grows teeth if two independent doctors decide I can't decide for myself. Until then, I am the queen of exactly this much kingdom. Then came the birthday brochure. After she left that night, I brewed tea and sat by the window where I can see the oak Thomas planted. The moon perched in its branches as if it might nest there. I thought about Elise as a little girl with a scraped knee and a bad temper for injustice. The way she used to hurl herself into my lap and demand correction of a wrong I hadn't seen. Somewhere that girl put her hands in her pockets and learned to look away. Maybe from me. In the morning, I called Mr. Brooks. "She'll come with a realtor," I said, "probably with a lockbox. She'll speak softly. She'll count on my shame." "Invite them," he said. "Let me know when." 2 days later, a white SUV rolled into my driveway and settled like a large, well-fed animal. Dan emerged in a navy suit, Elise in a pale blouse, a woman with clipped hair and a file folder tucked to her ribs. "We're just getting a sense of market value," Elise said. "It'll help you plan." "I have a plan," I said, and handed her a folder. Inside were copies of the trust, the springing power, my letter. She read, the color draining from her face the way it does when you stand up too fast. Dan laughed once, too loud. "These things are revocable," he said. "You could revoke it right now." "I could," I said. "I won't." Elise set the folder on the hall table as if it were a living thing that might wake. "Mom," she said, lowering her voice. "The stairs, the back steps, the neighborhood's changing. We're trying to help." "I know," I said, and meant it in the way you mean I've heard the words you chose. "But no." When they left, the realtor lingered. "For what it's worth," she murmured, glancing at their car. "You have options they're not telling you. If you ever want a second opinion, legal I mean, call me. My mother is 78. I know how this goes." She slid a business card across the table with the kind of discretion you use at funerals. The phone calls began a week later. A social worker from Adult Protective Services, apologetic. "We got an anonymous report of self-neglect," she said, voice careful. "May I visit?" "Of course," I said. "Bring an appetite, I'll bake." Her name was Tasha. She liked lemon bars. She walked through the house with a practiced eye and took notes I wanted to peek at and didn't. She asked me to count backward by sevens, to draw a clock, to remember 3 words, apple, penny, canvas, and tell them to her again after we'd discussed the weather, which unfairly favored the inquisitor. I did fine. At the door, she paused. "We see 2 kinds of daughters in these cases," she said gently. "The ones who are overprotective, and the ones who are predators. Sometimes the same woman is both." When she was gone, I sat very still and felt a heat in my face I hadn't felt since someone slapped me once in a Woolworth's for no reason. I had not thought of Elise that way. I didn't want to start now. That night, my neighbor, Meera Patel, rang the bell. She is my age and keeps roses like an army. Disciplined, abundant. She stood on my porch with a thermos of chai and a look. "I'm not a gossip," she began, which is how every good story starts. "But your son-in-law was talking to a man on our sidewalk yesterday. He pointed at your house. I didn't like the way his mouth looked when he did it." "What did it look like?" I asked. "Like someone making plans for what belongs to someone else." I bought a small camera and set it above the back door where the eaves cast a shadow in afternoon light. I set another in the hall, pointing at the pill bottles by the kitchen sink. It felt sneaky. I felt old and disloyal for resorting to it. I did it anyway. 3 days later, Elise let herself in with her key while I was in the garden. I watched her through the window. She opened my cabinet, lifted down my chamomile tea tin, and tucked something beneath it. My heart thudded in that particular rhythm that isn't fear exactly, but its clever cousin. When she'd driven away, I went inside and tipped the tin. A second set of pills, identical bottle, unfamiliar pharmacy, my name on a label, dosage doubled. I set them in a zip bag and drove them to Mr. Brooks. He called the next morning. "It's a sedative," he said. "Too much would make you slow and dizzy. Fall prone." His mouth flattened under his mustache. "We can file for an injunction now, or we can wait." "We wait," I said. "I want to see who this makes her." At church on Sunday, I sat behind Elise and my grandchildren. Lily's braid was crooked. I fixed it in the pew with her warm weight, leaning back against me like a cat. Elise looked tired in the way of women who keep a ledger in their head, even when they sleep. Afterward, I asked her to help me sort old photographs. "I want your help with the names," I said. "They're aunts you met only once. I'll forget them if I don't write them down." It was bait made of truth. She came on Tuesday with a tight smile and a timetable. We sat in the late light with albums open to our knees. She turned pages as if speed could save us from memory. "That was the summer Dad built the picnic table," I said, pointing to a picture of Thomas flushed and triumphant with a power drill. "He had a splinter in his thumb for a week because he refused gloves." "I remember," she said, and something soft passed over her face like cloud shadow over a field. Then the phone on our table buzzed and her eyes changed. "I have to take this," she said, walking into the hall. I followed a moment later to ask if she wanted coffee, and found her by the sink where the pill bottles stood like little white witnesses. She didn't see me. She put her hand on the unfamiliar bottle and then slowly on the familiar one, comparing weight. "Elise," I said, and she jumped so hard the bottle tapped the ceramic and clattered. She put a hand to her heart. "Mom, you scared me." "Do you need to go?" I asked mildly. She did. She left the album half open and the room smelling faintly of her perfume, which I had forgotten was the one I wore in 1984 when we went to the county fair, and Thomas won me a stuffed bear by hammering a bell to the top. The letter from the court arrived on a Thursday, crisp and official. Petition for temporary guardianship, filed by Daniel Merritt, concerned for the well-being of his mother-in-law, who suffers cognitive decline impacting her ability to manage finances safely. I called Mr. Brooks. He breathed in for a long time and let it out. "We've prepared for this," he said. "We'll need a capacity evaluation. Do you still have Dr. Ramos?" I did. My primary. A woman young enough to be my granddaughter and sharper than most scalpels. She tested me with the elaborate politeness of people who know intelligence has many dialects. She asked about current events, and I told her the mayor's dog had bitten a reporter last week and half the town was arguing about rabies. She asked me to draw intersecting pentagons, and I did. "You're fine," she said finally. And then, because she is kind, more than fine. We filed our own papers. We attached the video of Elise entering my kitchen, of the switch at the tea tin, of Dan's hand on my mail slot at midnight with a flashlight in his teeth. At the hearing, the judge wore his robe like a sweater and told jokes to the stenographer, who didn't laugh. Dan came in with a leather folder and a smile that showed every tooth. Elise's mouth was a thin line, meant to hold water and barely did. Our side spoke first. "Mr. Brooks is not a dramatic man," which made the moment he asked the bailiff to dim the lights feel like a curtain rose. The video played on a pulled-down screen that remembered chalk dust. Elise's face in my kitchen, tender and efficient, her hand sliding the bottle into place. Dan, exhaling smoke on my porch at midnight, speaking to someone who stayed in the shadows, my back porch light coming on like a sudden thought. Elise made a sound through her teeth. Dan's knee bounced. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Merritt." Mr. Brooks said gently. Do you recognize the person in this video? Elise's voice was ice-chipped with heat. It looks like me. And are you placing medication in your mother's kitchen? I was tidying. You were tidying beneath a chamomile tea tin? Dan objected on 4 grounds and lost all of them. The judge stayed pleasantly bored, which felt more damning than outrage. By the time Mr. Brooks played the audio of Dan on my porch, my little camera had a microphone I hadn't known how to turn off, saying, She's stubborn. We may have to let her fall once more. A hiss fell over the courtroom that was almost kind, like strangers averting their eyes when you stumble. The judge dismissed the petition with prejudice, which is legal for don't try this again. He also strongly suggested that any future anonymous reports to APS include names to avoid wasting everyone's time. Dan smiled hard enough to crack enamel. Elise didn't look at me when we left. In the hall, Lily ran to me and pressed her face to my belly the way she did when she was little and afraid of storms. Mom said we were going to the courthouse to help you, she whispered. Did we help? You helped, I said, and kissed the part in her hair. The week after the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the old house breathe, to pipes tick and settle, to wind in the oak. When I did drift off, I jolted awake, heart sprinting. I got up and baked. When grief used to gnaw, Thomas would wake up to the smell of cinnamon rolls at 3 a.m. and lead me back to bed with sticky fingers and patience. At dawn, I walked the neighborhood. Mira waved from her porch. The paper boy, no longer a boy and now a man with a baby strapped to his chest, said, Morning, Ms. Whitman, with the reverence reserved for women who have known you since you had acne. On the 4th morning, a white van idled at the end of my block. I am not suspicious by nature, but I am observant. The van drove away when I turned toward it. That afternoon, Mr. Brooks called. 2 lines of credit were opened in your name, he said. Small amounts, online store cards. We flagged the attempts. It may be nothing. Keep an eye on your mail. I've had an eye on everything, I said. It's exhausting. You're doing fine, he said. Better than fine. That night, someone tried my back door. The new camera at the eaves showed only a shoulder and a forearm, the fabric of a sweatshirt worn thin at the cuff. The handle rattled with a patience that felt familiar. I called 911. A patrol car rolled by, bright and brief. The officer walked my yard with a flashlight and shrugged in that helpless way of people who want to do more than their job allows. In the morning, an envelope stuck in my mailbox like a tongue. Inside was a photocopy of a quitclaim deed transferring my house to a shell company I didn't recognize. My name was on the signature line, the I dotted with the little loop I stopped using in 1979. Bring it in, Mr. Brooks said. We'll have a party. The private investigator's name was Renee. She wore her hair in a silver braid thick as a horse's tail and carried herself like an athlete who refused to admit she'd retired. I worked missing persons for 25 years, she said, sliding into a chair in Mr. Brooks's office. Then fraud. They're the same story. People disappear money, or money makes people disappear. She took the copy of the deed, studied it the way women our age study new moles. Sloppy, she said. But sloppy works if nobody looks. Let me look. A week later, she brought me a file thick enough to use as a trivet. Your son-in-law has debts, she said without embroidery. Gambling, mostly. Some investments that weren't. He's taken loans against phantom income. He forged your name on 2 credit applications, small ones to test the fence. He also set up a limited liability company last month. Guess the name. I stared at the page. Whitman Legacy Group, LLC. He planned to move your house into it, she said, then borrow against it. A slow siphon. You'd feel a pressure and think it was age. I felt my cheeks heat. Shame is funny that way. It lights up the person wronged, not the one who did wrong. Don't do that, Renee said softly, as if hearing my thoughts. Don't make yourself the guilty party because you love someone who did this. I closed the file gently so I wouldn't break the spine. How do we stop him? We don't. Not directly, she said. We let him stop himself in a room with a camera. The plan felt theatrical, which made me distrust it. I've never been fond of spectacle, but I am fond of justice that arrives wearing ordinary clothes. I invited Elise and Dan for Sunday supper. There's paperwork we should discuss, I said on the phone. It's time I stopped being stubborn. Silence hummed on the line. We'll come, Elise said finally. I cooked Thomas's favorites. Pot roast with carrots, green beans blistered with garlic, biscuits brushed with honey. Cooking is a kind of spell, and I wanted the house to remember all the ways we had loved one another before we learned to love badly. Mira came early and set tulips on the table. For courage, she said. She wore lipstick the color of cherries and the expression of a woman who has read every murder mystery twice. She kissed my cheek and told me she'd be home with her porch light on and her phone loud. Renee arrived next with Detective Alvarez, who had eyes the color of old pennies and the calm of a man unafraid of boredom. He set a small camera in the bookshelf and a second one under the table rim. Do I have to say anything? I asked. Just be yourself, he said, which is the worst kind of instruction and the only one that works. When Dan and Elise arrived, the house swelled with the sound of them. Lily and Max went into the yard with a soccer ball. I could see them through the window, their feet a drumbeat in the grass. We sat. Before we eat, I said, I want to make things simpler. I slid a stack of papers onto the table. They were bait. Revocation documents Renee and Mr. Brooks had drawn up that looked legal without being. They would never be filed. They were instruments, only of confession. Dan's eyes sharpened. We appreciate your flexibility, he said. We can guide you through these. He reached for a pen, then paused. But first, let's sign a little acknowledgement that you understand what you're signing. He pulled a page from his leather folder with a gesture that practiced law on television. Just to make everyone comfortable. I set my hands in my lap to hide their tremble. Read it to me, I said. He did. He read it as if I were deaf and foreign. It said that I recognized my cognitive decline and wished to appoint him as my financial agent effective immediately. Elise, I said, do you agree with this? She didn't meet my eyes. It's safer, she said. Things are complicated. Do you believe I'm confused? I asked. Sometimes. She swallowed. You forget dates. You burned the peach cobbler on Father's Day. I burned the cobbler because I was crying, I said mildly. Your father loved peaches. She looked at her hands. The skin between her thumb and forefinger pulsed. Mom, she said finally, voice low, we're just trying to keep you safe. I slid the revocation pages back toward her. Then keep me safe by reading the title. She read aloud. Revocation of trust and assignment of real property to Whitman Legacy Group, LLC. Her eyes flicked to Dan. He kept his smile steady by force. It's just a holding company, he said, for tax purposes. For your debts, I said. He laughed. What debts? The ones you owe to a man named Carlo, who waits in white vans at the end of streets, I said. And something in his face closed like a door slammed, not to keep someone out, but to trap someone in. Detective Alvarez cleared his throat in that theater-quiet way that suggests a scene change. Mr. Merritt, he said. I'm Detective Alvarez with the county police. Before you say anything else, I should tell you that this conversation is being recorded. You're not under arrest. Yet. Elise made a sound like a gasp folded in half. Dan stood, then sat. I want a lawyer, he said. Good, Alvarez said. Get one. I pushed my chair back and breathed. Lily and Max's laughter drifted in from the yard like a different life. I turned to my daughter. Elise, I said, did you put those pills in my kitchen? Her face crumpled at the edges. Dan said... She bit her lip hard enough to leave a dent. He said it would calm you down. He said I was being a bad daughter if I let you keep living with so much anxiety. Did you believe him? She opened her mouth, closed it. I wanted to, she said finally. It is easier to believe the thing that lets you sleep. Renee slid a small zip bag across the table. Inside was the pharmacy bottle. We have the prescription record, she said. Paid for with your husband's credit card. Delivered to his office. Dan's jaw flexed. You think you're clever, he said to me. You're not. You're an old woman with a stubborn streak. That house will suffocate you. Then I'll suffocate in something I love, I said. Detective Alvarez nodded once, as if I'd answered a test question correctly. Mr. Merritt, he said, standing, you're under arrest for attempted fraud, forgery, and filing false instruments. We'll add to the list as we go. Dan sputtered. Elise reached for his hand and then seemed to see it, really see it, and let it lie. The children appeared at the door with red cheeks and grass in their socks. Are we eating yet? Max asked. We are, I said, and my voice was steady. News travels in small towns as if it has a bicycle with greased chain. The next morning, the woman at the post office offered me a discount on stamps I didn't need. Men at the hardware store carried my bags to the car and loaded them as if they were infants. The librarian, my former boss, stocked the hold shelf with a cookbook I had once said I loved. In the afternoon, Elise's car sat at the curb. She didn't come in. I went out, slid into the passenger seat and waited. She kept her hands on the wheel the way new drivers are taught, 10 and 2, as if the car might lurch if she relaxed. "He says I ruined his life," she whispered. "He says you did?" "Dan ruined his life," I said. "We just let the light in." She nodded. Tears pooled, then held fast, not falling. "I thought I married a man who could carry us," she said. "I didn't know I married a man who needed to be carried." We sat in the hum of the idling engine and the bell of far-off chimes from the school down the street. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said finally, "for the pills, for the brochures, for the way I made you small to fit the story I could live with." "I accept that," I said. Forgiveness is trickier and not the same. I let the word hang where it belonged, further down the path we might walk toward or not. "I filed for separation," she whispered. "Lily heard us fighting and hid in the closet with Max. I found them by the shoes." "Good," I said, and surprised myself with the simplicity of it. The court case ground forward like the pantry door that always stuck in damp weather. False instruments, fraud, attempted elder exploitation. Dan's lawyer was a man who built sentences like houses of cards and watched them tremble with delight. Alvarez and Renee and Mr. Brooks built their case like a stone wall. It wasn't quick. It was solid. Some neighbors said I should have let it go for the sake of family. Those neighbors were mostly men who had not baked for their families at 3 a.m. and felt a fist unclench because cinnamon works even when nothing else does. Mira didn't say anything of the sort. She brought me roses that bled perfume at the throat and said simply, "You did right." In the long waiting days, I wrote letters to Thomas. It sounds dramatic. It isn't. It's ordinary and fierce, the way you write grocery lists and prayers. I wrote about tomatoes split by rain, about Lily's science fair. She made a water filter that would embarrass the city's engineering department. About Max learning to tie his shoes by making bunny ears fight. I wrote about what Elise said in the car. About the way her hands held the wheel like a boat rope in rough water. Sometimes I sat at the base of the oak and read him bits aloud. The neighbors would wave and keep walking, mercifully uninterested in whether I was talking to roots or ghosts. Midway through the trial came a twist I didn't see coming. A second forged deed. This one not mine. Elise's name. Transferring her house to the same shell company. Signatures wrong in the same left-handed way Dan never learned to discipline. He had planned not just to steal from me, but to sink us both and swim for shore alone. Elise saw the copy in Mr. Brooks' office and closed her eyes as if bracing for a wave. "He told me we were refinancing," she whispered. "He said it was for the kids' college. I didn't look. I signed things because he moved them under my pen." She opened her eyes. "I let him." "Looking is a choice," Renee said quietly. "So is not looking. Make the first one now." Elise did. She testified. It cost her something to do it while the man she chose sat watching with hands folded as if in prayer. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she looked at me in the gallery with a face stripped of all the little defenses she had layered. She looked like my child again, the righteous one with the scraped knee. I put my hand over my heart where she could see it. I didn't smile. It wasn't a smiling moment. It was a solemn one. On the day of the verdict, I wore my good navy dress and Thomas's watch, which is older than Elise and less temperamental, The courtroom smelled like lemon oil and old paper. The jury came in looking like people asked to judge at a church bake sale. Serious, proud, overwhelmed by sugar, guilty on fraud, guilty on forgery, guilty on attempted exploitation, not guilty on one count we expected to lose. The law is a narrow gate. The judge spoke about trust and family and the particular cruelty of making someone doubt her own mind. Dan did not look at me when the bailiff took him. Elise's shoulders went down an inch, which is sometimes what relief looks like when you have to keep standing. Outside, Mira hugged me with both arms and said into my hair, "You are terrifying when you need to be." "I don't want to be," I said. "I know," she said. "That's why you are." Life after victory is quieter than movies suggest. There are forms to fill and keys to change and nervous systems to coax back into their chairs. The house settled around me like a cat finally claiming its lap after pacing too long. I took down the cameras. I left the one over the back door. I like seeing raccoons judge my compost pile at midnight. Elise found a small rental near the children's school. She came by on Tuesdays with Lily and Max. Sometimes she came alone on Thursdays, and we sat with our hands around mugs of tea and talked about nothing brave while we gathered the nerve to talk about the things that asked for courage. When she cried, she used the hem of her sleeve, the way she did when she was 10 and too proud for Kleenex. I kept a box near, unopened, a quiet offering for when pride tired. One evening, she brought a folded piece of paper. "Mom," she said, "I wrote an apology, a real one. You don't have to read it now." She set it on the table and looked at the floor as if compliments might fall and break. "I read it later with the care you use when opening a delicate package. It was not perfect. It didn't need to be. It was the right size for a beginning." I spoke at the library at a Saturday workshop on elder rights, which is a phrase I hated before I needed it. "We are not fragile," I told the room full of women who looked like me and women who would someday. "We are not forgetful by default. We are not burdens rehearsing our exits. We are women with names on deeds and stories in our hands. Make your paperwork as sturdy as your spine. Tell your children you love them. Tell your lawyer more." Tasha from Adult Protective Services sat in the back and waved. Afterward, she came up and squeezed my hand. "You'd make a good volunteer," she said, which is how governments recruit without a budget. I started a group that meets in the church hall with coffee that tastes like penance and cookies that make up for it. We bring our documents, wills, trusts, blank forms, and read them aloud like we're checking each other's knitting. We talk about daughters who are too eager and sons who are too absent and the thin line between help and harm. We write down the names of lawyers with cinnamon breath. In spring, Lily planted a sapling in the yard, a red bud with heart-shaped leaves that look like paper valentines stapled to branches. She dug a hole as big as her faith and set the tree carefully, pressing the earth around it with both hands, the way children pat sandcastles to persuade them to hold. "What should we name it?" she asked. "Name it for yourself," I said. "I'll be here for the red bud. You be here for you." She thought for a moment. "Brave," she said, and then, seeing my face, "No, not because of me, because of you." I didn't argue. You learn, if you live long enough, when to let praise land. Max hammered a little sign into the ground that said, "Do not climb," in his terrible, perfect printing. He climbed it anyway. On the first anniversary of the birthday brochure, Elise came for dinner with a pie she bought and didn't pretend she baked. After we ate, we carried plates to the sink and stood shoulder to shoulder the way we did when she was 14, and going through a phase where only running hot water and my presence could dissolve her temper. "Do you remember the purple sweater?" she asked suddenly, and I did. The one Thomas bought me our 4th Christmas, the one she stole and wore until it draped her like a cape. "You spilled paint on it," I said. "You cried for 2 days." "I practiced crying for 2 hours," she said, and we both laughed, which is what healing sometimes sounds like when it finally learns to stand. She dried her hands and turned to me. "I wish Dad were here," she said. "So do I," I said, and we stood there with Wish filling the room like something baking. If this were a different kind of story, Dan would write from prison and say he's changed. Maybe he has. People are surprising. I have not heard from him. That is a mercy I gratefully accept. I hear, through the vine that grows through every town, that he took a job in the prison library. "A good place to learn something," Mr. Brooks said when I told him, and I nodded because even men I don't like contain slivers of maybes I cannot see. The van doesn't idle at the end of my street anymore. When I see white vans, I watch only long enough to make sure the driver is eating a sandwich, and then I let it go. I keep the brochure. Not out of nostalgia, but documentation. I taped it in the front of a binder I titled "What Happens When," which is not a threat as it turns out, but a blessing. It has tabs. House, health, money, Liza, for Elise, grandchildren, friends, letters to Thomas and Miss C, which is where I put things like the recipe for the lemon bars Tasha likes. Sometimes I take it down and show it to women at the church group. "This is how it starts for some of us," I say, "with a kindness shaped like a cage. Remember, you are not a bird." In summer, the oak Thomas planted throws shade across the porch and cools the rooms as if it knows it is doing a job and does it with pride. The redbud lily named leans into the light with a stubborn grace I recognize. The house holds the smell of coffee and books and clean laundry on rainy days. On Tuesdays, the grandchildren come after school. We eat popsicles on the steps and discuss the kind of science that only 8-year-olds understand. Lily tells me she wants to be an engineer or a poet. I tell her she should be both, and watch her consider it like a dare. On Thursdays, Elise and I walk to the corner and back, which is not far and also a pilgrimage. We talk about practical things, the cost of shoes, the groceries, how to fix a leaky sink, and sometimes the words around the deep things are enough. Sometimes, when the light is right, the porch fills with moths, and I sit with a cup of tea and listen to them thrum. I think of the girl Elise was, the woman she is, the woman I am still allowed to be. I am 74. I am not finished. On my 75th birthday, Elise brought a different kind of paper. A handmade card with Lily's crooked letters and Max's dinosaur sticker on the corner. Inside, a note from Elise in her tidy script. I don't want your house. I want your recipes and your laugh. I want your stories and your hand on my back when I am tired. I want to learn to braid like you taught me. I want to be the kind of mother you were even when I didn't act like it. We ate cake on the porch. The oak shook its leaves like applause. I thought of Thomas and I didn't cry. Or maybe I did. It doesn't matter. After everyone left and the house was soft again with after voices, I made tea and stood in the doorway and spoke out loud to the night, which sometimes answers even when it is busy being night. I kept it, I told him. I kept the house. I kept myself. And I kept our girl. The wind moved through the redbud with a sound like paper turning. Somewhere a fox barked, small and fierce. I closed the door, locked it, turned off the lights I didn't need, and went to bed in a room that holds my breathing like a promise. When the house settled, it felt like a living thing choosing again to be mine.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.